I was found guilty of sexual assault.
This convicted sexual offender just completed a 1-year conditional sentence in the community with a strict curfew, and says not once in that time did his probation officer come to his house to check on him.
Nobody has ever come, no police, no probation officer. I could have done anything I want.
He claims he's innocent and warns the probation system in Ontario isn't working.
If I were a real molester, I would go back and do things because nobody watched me. Nobody hits on my door.
The only contact he had with his probation officer was when he'd report to the office.
You don't know how much people lives in my house. You don't know how much teenager lives in my house.
And there was a teenager living right above him, he says, but it's possible no one ever knew. He says he played by the rules, but knows of other criminals who break them all the time.
Offenders think probation and parole in Ontario is a joke?
Yeah, they think it's a joke.
Scott McIntyre is the union rep for probation and parole officers in Ontario.
How do you think the public would react if they knew what you know about how offenders are supervised in the community?
I think they'd be appalled. I think that there's an assumption by both the judiciary and the public that when an offender is placed on a supervision order, that someone in some law enforcement capacity is actually checking on them.
That's the problem. No one is checking.
This probation officer, whose identity we're concealing to protect her job, wants to go out and check on offenders, but
I was told we don't do home visits, flat out.
she says once a client leaves her office, there's little to no follow-up.
In some cases, we are talking about violent, serious offenders that aren't properly being monitored in the community.
But here's the contradiction. While probation officers like the one you just heard from say they don't do home visits, the ministry's own policy states otherwise. Global News obtained a copy of that manual, and in the very first page, it praises community visits as a way of validating information, helping to establish a relationship with offenders, and providing enhanced community safety. And yet, in practice, more than a dozen probation officers across the province told us curfew checks and home visits rarely happen. Why? Because they're simply not allowed to work outside business hours, and because of safety concerns.
If I'm not safe, I don't go. I'm not gonna die today.
Danielle Dusablon is also a probation officer and regional union rep.
We have no personal protective equipment. So if you're attending a residence, you have a pen and a cell phone and you cross your fingers.
So who's supposed to check on the offender?
It's the police responsibility.
Not so, says the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police.
It's a core responsibility of probation, and if they don't feel they have the tools or the ability or the equipment, that's an issue that they need to deal with.
In some cases, we learned, monitoring offenders comes down to personal relationships between probation officers who call police to help them out.
We're at a crisis, at a breaking point, and we're failing the public badly on the public safety front.
Kyle McLaughlin, convicted of child luring in 2013, sentenced to 18 months in jail, 3 years of probation, and 20 years on the sex offender registry. When he was released, he came here, to the working-class city of Oshawa, Ontario, with strict probation instructions from the judge. Prohibited from using a computer or any other device that accesses the internet, not to be in the presence of any child under the age of 16. In the eyes of Kyle McLaughlin's probation officer, he was a very high risk to reoffend. But Global News has learned not once did a probation officer nor a police officer go to check on him in the community to make sure he was following the rules of his release. The only contact he had with a probation officer was when he'd report into their office. And so it doesn't come as a surprise to some that on January 13th, 2015, Kyle McLaughlin was found inside the Durham Public Library, once again trying to lure a young girl online.
If you look at sex offenders, nobody's out there monitoring or surveying them to make sure they're not at the local YMCA or the local park.
In the absence of a probation officer being out in the community, here's how Kyle McLaughlin's case was handled. Written in his file were the following instructions. Monitor compliance with internet and device restrictions via self-report and contact police if a violation is suspected.
We're asking a criminal to monitor themselves?
Yeah, I mean, these are...
Like, that sounds crazy.
It wouldn't be something I would put in my case management to self-report.
But it's happening.
It does, yes.
So we took the case to an Ontario court justice of 27 years.
It would be very disturbing to me if I found that that was the result of a sentence that I would impose. If we're going to impose the conditions, we should be backing them up.
Justice Westman sees probation as an opportunity for support and rehabilitation.
To simply see them in the office, there's something that's not quite real. Let them see you at Tim Hortons. Let you see them at their kitchen table, where you get a better feel for the person and a better understanding.
And in some parts of Canada, probation officers do just that. About half of all provinces conduct home visits. At the federal level, parole officers do them all the time. But in Ontario, that's not the case.
There's no longer any community in community corrections. We are like an air traffic control. We articulate everything that we do out of our office. We are not in the community.
As for Kyle McLaughlin, he was convicted of child luring once again, sent back to jail, and sentenced to another term of probation with near identical restrictions as the last time.
Roger.
Break the terms of your federal parole, and this can happen.
He was in for dangerous driving causing death. It's a Canada-wide warrant for breach of parole, and he's unlawfully at large.
This is Ontario's Rope Squad, Repeat Offender Parole Enforcement, a partnership between municipal and provincial police forces which brings in offenders who are at large.
Someone has to pay attention that when these people are running around with Canada-wide warrants, they could potentially hurt someone or commit a crime, and we want to stop that.
Not 24 hours after a warrant is issued for this federal parolee.
So he's at a parole office, so we're just heading there now to go get him.
The squad zeroes in
Which one?
and arrests him.
They're going to search you again, okay, as well?
Charges are not laid, but the message is swift and consequential. The Rope Squad pulls in an average of 800 offenders a year. An estimated 90% of them are federal parolees who've committed the most serious crimes. Problem is, there's nothing like this for provincial offenders. So criminals who break their probation are picked up far less often.
Who's going out to get that offender that's wanted on a warrant?
Exactly, nobody. Nobody.
Scott McIntyre is the union rep for probation and parole officers in Ontario.
There may be the odd case where the person is extremely high risk and the police will go actually out and look for him.
It's sometimes only once an offender has committed a new crime that they're arrested. Like Caleb Heaton, who had a warrant out for his arrest in Ontario for allegedly breaching his probation and was caught in BC after breaking into a woman's home and sexually assaulting her.
We don't have police actively searching for our wanted offenders.
So what you're saying is not only is no one checking on these offenders at home, but they can break the terms of their probation. You can put a warrant out for their arrest and we're still not going to go looking for them.
Pretty much.
So we wanted to know how many warrants are out there for offenders who allegedly broke the rules of their release. Through Freedom of Information, we got the answer, and it's startling. There are more than 4,500 outstanding warrants in Ontario. Criminals, police say, didn't comply with their community sentence and who could be living anywhere.
No one came to pick up this lawyer's client, who in a year and a half on probation never once checked in with his probation officer.
He didn't even realize he was on a probation order.
He didn't even know?
He claims to have not known.
So this person is doing whatever they want.
Correct.
The fallout of a system that is weak in consequences is some probation officers don't even bother writing up offenders who break their probation in the first place.
Yes, I've seen that in the office I worked in.
You've seen it?
Yes. There's a lot of good people that want to do their jobs effectively, and that's important to know.
I never heard that we don't do home visits.
Surprise from the minister in charge of probation in Ontario when we shared our findings that some offenders are rarely being monitored in the community.
You've never heard that?
No, we do home visit at times when required.
Not so, say probation officers.
We spoke with one officer who's never once done a home visit. Never once in 12 years.
These are the experts. They work in the field.
But you're the minister.
Yes, I know. What we're engaging today, I will take back and follow up for sure.
And yet our sources say probation officers have been raising this issue with the ministry for years. As for offenders who allegedly break the rules and whose warrants aren't being pursued,
actually, this is a little surprising to me because my understanding is based on the risk associated with that offender, then the police would engage.
but the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police says not their job.
No local police services do not go actively looking for those individuals that are in warrants. That's a responsibility and a core function of probation.
I'll share a copy of that with you.
So for the 4,500 outstanding warrants in Ontario,
Who's going to go get those criminals?
Well, it goes back to the term, right? For me, it's always something where, in terms of working in partnership.
we never did get a substantive answer. One possible solution to the gaps in the system is the creation of a separate unit of compliance officers tasked with being in the field.
Would solve issues of compliance checks, therefore enhancing public safety. We would actually have a unit out there that would check for the whereabouts of offenders that are wanted on our breach charges.
The union claims they've been suggesting it to the ministry for over a decade.
They've said, no way, wrong message, no.
This week, perhaps a shift in tone.
I would say I'm very open to have a conversation about how to improve a system.